All right, we are live in 3, 2, 1, go.
Thank you everyone for attending our speaker series today. We're going to hear a great talk from Dr. Bob Lutz from NASA Goddard. So I want to thank him ahead of time for the great talk that he's going to give. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. Before we get started, I really want to thank Dr. Lutz for his time. But I also want to thank Marshall University and the College of Science and the Physics Department. They have always helped out our SPS student group here on campus, and we really appreciate the help that and support that they've provided for us over the years. I also want to thank the American Institute of Physics. They've helped financially sponsor the Faces of Physics speaker series. So we definitely want to give them a shout out and thank them for the financial that's assisting our local chapter here to finance the speaker series. So if you're interested in physics and interested in what you hear tonight, don't be afraid to reach out to Dr. Lutz or myself if you have an interest in physics. Our physics department here at Marshall has 6 active physics faculty that are active in research. We are a department actually of 10 faculty members. And if you have an interest in physics, I would be happy to guide you in the right direction to talking to one of those faculty members about research opportunities and careers in physics. So my email, you can find on our website, it's mcbrides@marshall.edu. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our physics program here at Marshall, we have a BS degree and a MS degree, Master of Science degree. We have 5 areas of emphasis. We have emphasis of physics, where you can get a BS degree and then a minor in another program. We have these areas of emphasis for biology, medical physics, medical imaging, straight physics track, as well as the applied engineering physics track. It's really applied physics track with some engineering classes in there as well. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me. Marshall University is an R2 school that has about 9,200 undergrads and 2,000 to 3,000 master's level students. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie, and she will introduce Dr. Bob Lutz.
Thank you, Dr. McBride. So just a little bit of info about Dr. Bob Lutz. He received a Bachelor's of Science in Meteorology and Oceanography from New York University, a Master of Arts in Meteorology and Oceanography from the City University of New York, a Master of Science in Meteorology, and then a PhD in Geography, Remote Sensing from the University of Maryland, College Park. Bob has been employed at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland for over 39 years as a contractor and now as a civil servant serving in science and engineering roles. He has alternated between management and technical positions. Bob has served as a section manager and associate branch head within GSFC, as well as technically contributing to the design of a field experiment measuring trace gases in the boreal forests of Canada, and supporting the development of ground data systems for NASA research and NOAA operational weather satellites. His present position is providing oversight to the flight software sustaining engineering task as the civil servant manager, which supports over 16 Earth and space science missions and employs almost 30 staff members. In addition, Bob has been very active in diversity and inclusion activities at GSFC, being a member of the Engineering Directorate Committee for over 15 years, and a founding member of the GSFC Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Advisory Committee. Bob lives with his partner of 35 years, Brian, in Washington, D.C. He was a marathon runner and a backpacker, and these days enjoys hiking, camping, and especially skiing. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Bob Lutz. But first, Dr. McBride, I need you to give me screen sharing permission so that I can put up his presentation.
That would be helpful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
All right, you should be good to go.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. Okay, so Dr. Lutz, without further ado, you may begin.
Okay, greetings everybody. I hope the first part of this talk won't be too dry, but it's about engineering. And then the second part is more about diversity and inclusion, which is a lot more fun to talk about. One of the things I say first off in these discussions that my day job, I'm a computer engineer in the flight software branch, that's code 582. but my day job has been co-chair of the LGBT Advisory Committee and one of the founding members. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is two synergetic stories from NASA Goddard Space Flight Center that have led to mission success. And one is our technical excellence, and we're going to use an example of the flight software sustaining engineering task, and also the support for diversity inclusion, where the example would be the LGBT Advisory Committee. Next slide, please. So the agenda here, I'm going to do an introduction to NASA and Goddard, because a lot of you folks may not be familiar with NASA. You may have heard about it, but you may not be familiar with it. Then part one will be what is flight software sustaining engineering. Then I'll do a background of what we do, pre-launch activities, post-launch activities, and then a concrete example, Discover mission, which was a NOAA mission, and I will talk about a little bit about that. And then I'll field questions. And then part two, which is very different, is about the support that Goddard does for diversity and inclusion at Goddard. And I'll be talking about the LGBT Advisory Committee and the LGBT survey, the survey results, and the impact of the survey and the steps forward. And I'll take questions then too. Next slide, please. Okay, NASA was established in 1958, and it's responsible for the civilian space program, which we all well know, but we also do a lot of aeronautics, Earth, and space research, and that's what kind of Goddard does, and I'll cover that. This is an important point. Within the yearly Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, NASA has achieved the highest employee engagement index in the federal government for all large agencies for the 10th year in a row. And why? This is my personal opinion. We have challenging work, technical excellence, we empower employees, and we support D&I. NASA is composed of 10 major operational research centers in the United States, plus headquarters in D.C. Goddard is the largest combined system of science and engineers in the United States and is the largest civil center of 11,000 civil servants and contractors. And we're employed at 6 different sites. Next slide. Okay, these are our sites. Greenbelt is the main campus. That's the one I work at. Wallops Flight Facility, where we do launching and payload. Goddard Institute of Space Studies. That building. Okay, I actually did my graduate work there, and I know you guys are young out there, but I hopefully maybe one of you know where that picture is from also. If you watch Seinfeld, that Tom's Restaurant in the beginning, Tom's Restaurant is right below GIS. And so you actually see the Goddard Institute of Space Studies when you watch Seinfeld. Again, that's going back 20 years now. We also have a facility in West Virginia and one in New Mexico, small one in New Mexico, and also in Texas. Next slide. We specialize in a lot of things. And when people think of NASA, they think of, going to the moon and space exploration. We're not really into that very much. We're into astrophysics. We're the ones that build the space telescopes, and that's Hubble and the soon to be launched Webb Space Telescope. We also build satellite systems for NOAA, so we're very active in the Earth science. And also we do a lot of planetary and lunar science where we send missions, not like to Mars, but we send satellites like to Jupiter and things like that. Again, we do some human exploration and operation support, but that's mainly done at the more operational centers where we're more of a research center. Next slide, please. Okay, what is flight software sustaining engineering? Now, the graph shows basically 3 different parts of, you could say, satellite systems. And one is the space segment, which I will be talking about, and that's the spacecraft. And also you have the ground segment that basically controls the satellite, does the data processing. And then you have the user segment, who actually are the users of the data. And so the flight software is software that is hosted on board the spaceflight elements. And that's the software that controls the spacecraft or the instrument. After launch and the commissioning period, a mission enters phase E. Now that's after launch. And basically an operations plan has been developed that's been previous phases of the mission. Now, one of the interesting things is the difference between the ground segment and the space segment. The ground segment is in the ground. So when something breaks, you can actually fix it. If something breaks on the spacecraft, you can't fix it. So you have to do a workaround, and either, there's redundancy built in a lot of spacecrafts, but sometimes you have to do something new, and basically it's involving software changes since we can't go up there and replace hardware. Next slide, please. This is from the NASA handbook, where sustainment generally refers to the supply, maintenance, transportation, sustaining engineering, data management, configure management, manpower, personnel, training, and all that stuff, good things. I put that down because this is the technical terms. And sustaining engineering refers to technical activities that include, for example, updating designs, introducing new materials, and revising product, process, and test specifications. These activities typically involve first re-engineering items to solve known problems and then qualifying the items and sources of supply. For my team, sustaining engineering consists of principally flight software updates and possible enhancements of software and/or correcting anomalies detected on board the spacecraft and science instruments. Next slide, please. The task has been developed over 30 years with over 30 missions supported over that span. We're currently supporting 16 missions, which includes space science and earth science missions. And we have a mixture of support for instruments aboard the spacecraft or the spacecraft itself. Now, one of the advantages is that we have developed standardized processes, procedures, systems, approaches, techniques, methodologies, organization, tools, documents, templates, and reviews for sustaining engineering. This has provided an economic solution and minimizes overhead of reinventing the wheel for each mission. So even though these missions are very different, we can apply the same principles of sustaining engineering for them. And we also have a high confidence for mission success in applying a proven model. Next slide, please. Now, who we are. Basically, FSSE is implemented by a pool of engineers. And currently, we have 25 contractors and 3 civil servants. Now, what we'd like to do is initially embed the team into the development team before launch, which gains the benefits of supporting the flight software build and test, and gaining familiarity with the flight software code, the test bed, the test procedures, and the results. Also, each engineer is typically knowledgeable of multiple mission flight software, and every mission has multiple flight software engineers knowledgeable of the mission. So what we've done is built a lot of redundancy, because people do leave a project and we don't want a single point of failure of supporting a mission, because sometimes, as I will give the Discover example, there is an important anomaly that has to be fixed fairly fast on the mission or we can lose the mission. Like I said, allows flexible allocation of people power to meet the dynamic range of support for the life of the mission. And it also enables the benefits of sharing engineering knowledge. And the Discover example will show how some of the experience we learned on one mission was able to benefit Discover. I have a technical lead that provides oversight to the team across the entire mission set. And I co-chair CCBs, configuration control boards, that with the mission directors, and that ensures the integrity of the discipline and making sure that priorities are set straight. Next slide, please. These are the current and past missions that we've supported. And one of the things with Goddard, how should I put this? We actually build spacecrafts too good. They last much, much longer than they were ever expected. I actually worked on Terra in early 2000. Terra and Aura were sent up in 2000 or 2001. They had a lifetime of 5 years. So a lot of the missions we send up basically last a lot longer than we want. So it requires a lot more sustaining engineering than was ever expected. Some of our upcoming missions, and you'll be hearing about this in the news because it's been in development for 20 years, the James Webb Space Telescope, which is supposed to launch in October, and LCRD is supposed to launch in June. Next slide, please. My computer just went off. Sorry, my computer just shut down and back up again. Okay, some of our pre-launch preparation activities is that we develop insights of the flight software. And that's very important because we just don't want to have this dropped on us right after post-launch. And so that basically gives us the requirements, the design, the code, the operations concept, the test bed that the operational team are using, the test procedures that they're using, and anomaly support strategies. And we did, like I said, we work with the development team before launch. And generally, we put people on 2 years before launch. And we develop and certify the end-to-end flight software patch methodology. And we develop a software toolkit. And again, we develop a relationship between flight software, operations, interface responsibilities. So there's a lot of interaction with the development team, and then with the testing team, and then with the pre-launch team. Next slide, please. We establish a lot of CM processes and document repositories, establish and maintain the flight software database. As you see, we're very heavily into system engineering. We have been criticized that we're too heavily into system engineering, but we have a proven record here, and it does add overhead, but it works. We develop a certification regression test suite, and this is important. We relocate and certify the flight software test bed that the operational folks have developed. We actually take that for post-launch, and we support pre-launch mission and science operation simulations. Next slide. We do extensive documentation development. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's a lot of paperwork that we do to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And we have an operations interface agreement and a configuration plan. So there is a tremendous amount of documentation that are agreed on both sides. So there's no confusion about responsibilities after launch. Next slide, please. Some of our post-launch responsibilities are, again, I mentioned the configuration control board that establishes priorities of what work is done. We support analysis and recovery of flight software anomalies. We develop, test, and document approved flight software products. And we support the uplink of the flight software changes. We actually don't uplink the changes. We deliver it, like, for example, to NOAA, which I'll talk about, and to Discover, to the ground to basically uplink it to the satellite. Next slide, please. We provide general support to the flight operations team, and we ensure retention of flight software expertise, which is important. It generally takes an engineer 6 months to a year to get up to speed. And sounds like a long time, but there's a lot of stuff that we have developed, a lot of tools and a lot of documentation, and it takes a tremendous amount of time to keep people to be able to have them do their job. They just can't walk in and do it. So we basically have to make sure that we retain our expertise. Next slide, please. Okay, now I'll talk about the Discover patch. This is actually a real example of what we did. Now, Discover is the Deep Space Climate Observatory, and it's a space weather station that monitors changes in the solar wind, providing space weather alerts and forecasts for geomagnetic storms that could disrupt power grids, satellites, telecommunications, aviation, and GPS. It was launched in 2015. The Discover mission was reincarnated from Triana. That's Al Gore's satellite. And that's kind of interesting in that is going back to 1999. So a lot of the satellite was it was 16 years old when it was launched. So the issue was that the Discover gyroscope started to fail in early July 2019 and had only about 5 weeks of operational life remaining on the Z-axis. That means we couldn't really control Discover. So it was placed in safe hold in order to preserve the remaining functionality for station keeping maneuvers. Now the problem was that when it was put in safe hold, it couldn't produce any science data. So therefore, NOAA switched their space weather operations to the Advanced Composition Explorer satellite, which was even older than Discover. So this added a tremendous risk to NOAA's ability to provide space weather alerts. And space weather alerts are very, very important. We haven't had a really strong magnetic storm for quite a few years now, but we had one, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. But the advantage of Discover is that it can give a pre-alert that satellite systems can shut down their shutters and things like that so they won't get damaged. So next slide, please. So the solution was to solve this issue. It was decided that Discover would utilize its far field tracker derived rates to determine spacecraft attitude control, as was done with LRO when their gyro failed in 2018. So that was good. We already had experience. Based on our experience with LRO and the development of a previous Discover patch, we worked with the algorithm development branch and provided a preliminary estimate to NOAA of 6 months for patch development, testing, and installation. And frankly, NOAA wasn't too thrilled with that. Basically, they said, wow, 6 months. But we said, you know, it takes a long time for us to basically develop what we want to do, then do the design, do the build, and do extensive testing. Because I'm proud to say this, we do not fail. And so we submitted a CCR with a detailed schedule consisting of the requirements, design, implementation, testing, and this was reviewed with NOAA and NASA staff, and we actually added resources, but we didn't add too many resources because sometimes throwing people at a problem is not going to have the problem be solved any faster. The good news was that the patch was successfully developed on time, tested, uplinked to NOAA to Discover in March of 2020, and things have been normal since the installation of the patch. So I guess the takeaway from this was the successful development, testing, and installation of Discover patch for NOAA within a tight time frame and budgetary constraints demonstrated the superior system engineering approach that we've developed, as well as the dedication, expertise of our staff. In this addition, for his exceptional technical skills, the lead flight software Discover engineer Contractor was nominated and won the GSFC Engineering and Technology Director Contractor Engineering Award in the fall of 2020. So we have a very dedicated staff. I mean, he actually worked Thanksgiving Day weekend, many Saturdays, because we're under tight deadlines and it was an important thing to do. So I guess I'd like to take a break here and answer any technical questions, because again, I'm going to be talking D&I stuff, which would be very different than what I've talked about before.
All right, so just want to remind everyone that there's maybe about a 20-second delay from our meeting and when you receive it. So in the meantime, while you guys are getting this information and typing up your questions, I want to remind everybody that at the end of today's talk, we are going to do the drawing for the Yeti cooler that we've had out in the market for a year now. So if you put your name in that, if you made a donation and put your name to win the Yeti cooler, make sure you stay tuned after the meeting today so that we can make a drawing for that and see if you win. Okay. So any questions so far? I do have one question that I've never found out, but I just thought about it when you were talking about your team there. I never have understood the difference between contractors and civil servants at NASA.
Oh yes. Well, civil servants, we work for the federal government, and contractors work for individual firms like Boeing or Raytheon. One of the advantages of being a civil servant is, how should I put this? It's kind of like being a professor. Once you have tenure, you can't be fired. So we are insured our position after 3 years. When you're a contractor, contracts get won and lost, and so you're never guaranteed your position all the time. And so it can be a precarious situation, but you have more flexibility being a contractor. So there's both advantages.
All right, thank you very much. So I don't think we have, yeah, go ahead, Dr. McBride.
Sorry, I was just going to ask a question, if there was still some people formulating questions out there. What happens when you do get that solar flare from the sun with the telescopes? You said that the early warning system allows you time to actually, shore up the telescopes and close the lenses and that. But what actually happens to the telescopes when they actually get exposed to that solar flare from the sun?
They can be basically ruined. I don't know, that's not my expertise,
Okay.
but
Okay.
yeah, but if there was a bad solar flare, I mean, supposedly during the 1880s, there was a tremendous solar flare, and they said if we had something like that now, it would wipe out the GPS system. So we
Okay.
have some protection devices in some of our satellites, but not all.
So that's very crucial then to have that timely warning. And
Yes.
All right, so it doesn't seem like we have any further questions at the moment, but I'm sure we'll get a few at the end. We usually get some at the end, so
Okay.
we can pick up where we left off, if that's okay with you.
Yep. So this part will be a lot more fun. Okay, I know I may have bored some of you guys. Again, you know, engineering is not exactly the most thrilling work, but it is very satisfying and it's very thorough. But one of the things I did want to talk about is about the NASA Goddard, our history of diversion and inclusion. And we basically have an implementation plan that's been developed many years. Next slide, please. We basically have 9 advisory committees, and advisory committees are basically chartered to advise Goddard management on specific advisory committee topics and concerns. So we have African Americans, Asian Pacific Americans, Hispanics, individual with disabilities, Native Americans, women, LGBT, new and developing professionals, and veterans. So we actually have many different advisory committees, and we meet regularly with center management. And also there's monthly meetings that we have to interact with each other. Next slide, please. So this is about our committee, and I don't know how many people recognize the gentleman on the right. That's George Takei from Sulu, from the original Star Trek. He came over to Goddard, I forget, 10, 15 years ago to give a talk. So about our committee, this was very important. In 2002, there was a town hall held about LGBT topics at Goddard, and it was led by the associate director of Goddard. And one of the things he pointed out was that there was no either advisory committee or no group that represented LGBT folks at Goddard. And that's when I got very involved in the formation of the advisory committee. And on a personal note, I remember telling my dad this in, I guess it was 2002, 2003. And my dad said, "Are you worried about your career? Because you're basically really outing yourself now." And I said, "No, I'm not, because basically Goddard management has my back." And so it was very important that the director of Goddard, associate director of Goddard, ran that meeting. We have Pride events every year, and I'm going to discuss the LGBT survey that was released in 2017, because in many ways it is a groundbreaking survey for the federal government. A lot of private industries have done this, but we were the first one to really do an in-depth survey. EPA had done a short one, but as you will see, we did a very, since we're a bunch of engineers and scientists, we basically did a very in-depth survey, and that's something I'm going to talk about now. Basically, we tried for 3 years to basically do the survey, and it was to access the current workplace and climate for LGBT employees, and also to help influence future committee programs and priorities. We had originally resistance because of a standalone survey, but we didn't want to mix this up with other groups because then it gets very complicated. The survey was released with the Center's director endorsement in the early December, and it was open for 6 weeks. We did a tremendous marketing campaign, and as the result, that we had 1,249 survey respondents. And again, there was a little bit of an issue because this was only supposed to go out to civil servants, but the first email that was sent out actually went to contractors and civil servants. So we weren't sure of what the rate was, but since we had 12,000 people on base and 4,000 or 5,000 civil servants, the response rate was somewhere between 15 and 25%. So we're not really sure because we don't know who the base was. What was very important was the data analysis was prepared by a statistician, as you'll see. Next slides. The initial survey was sent out to 13,000 email addresses, and again, 1,249 respondents. Again, we had a 9.5% response rate or higher, as not all email addresses are active. Now, this is important. The survey results, we had 17 survey questions and 9 demographic questions. And 14 out of 17 were the Likert scale answers, and 2 were freeform. And I'll go into what a Likert scale answer is. A Likert scale question, basically you have 5 different degrees: agree, somewhat agree, neither agree, somewhat disagree, or disagree. And next slide, this will be a little more clear, is that it measures average positive sentiment. For example, next slide. For directly positively worded Likert scale questions, like I am treated fairly, I am comfortable, you would assign the highest weight to agree answers and the lowest to disagree. For inversely negatively worded, I felt pressure, I feel uncomfortable, we'd assign the highest weight to disagree and the lowest to agree. So in general, the higher number that you got for a question, the better that people felt. And so overall, one of the positive things was the overall positivity score for the whole survey was 4.24 out of 5, which is actually in the high range. And the highest positivity score was 4.7, and the lowest positivity score was 3.2. And I'll go into a little bit more about some of the stuff that we did. Next slide, please. So we looked at many different things: gender, age, Goddard location, supervisory status, your race and national origin, and also with your supervisor or non-supervisor. But our most important findings were about sexual orientation and openness about sexual orientation or gender identity. Next slide, please. Now, this was very interesting because out of 1,201 respondents, we had 940 that they said they were heterosexual, and 167 that were LGB, but we also had 94 that preferred not to identify. So you had like 8% of the people that did not want to identify what they were. We also realized that, 167 out of 1,201 for LGB, I mean, there was a preference that a lot of LGBT people would take the survey, so that may not be true. But one of the things that's really important is the overall survey positivity scores for each category. And basically, the positivity score for heterosexuals was 4.34. For the LGBT group, it was 3.92, which is significantly lower. And for the people that would not even identify, they were even lower. So it basically showed that there was a correlation between sexual orientation and positivity. Next slide, please. Between 171, because there were 2 different questions, and 233 people identified as being part of the LGBT community. Between 14, again, I think I said this, 70% of the survey respondents, that's a little bit higher than we would expect, but that considering that as an LGBT survey, they probably have more LGBT people take it. This was important. Our survey shows that approximately 52%, 107 of 202 of our LGBT employees are not out at work with neither supervisors nor coworkers. Now, even though this was consistent with the 2014 Nationwide Human Rights Campaign Foundation survey that found 53% were closeted at work, it is surprising that Goddard isn't better than the national average, given our geographical location, a fairly progressive workforce, and basically, a D&I, very active D&I program. And so we were just surprised that half of our LGBT workers are in the closet. Next slide. Now, this was another interesting thing. If you identify as other than straight, how open are you about your sexual orientation or gender identity with? And basically, as you can see, the overall survey positivity categories for each category, the people that were open LGBT, it was 4.39. People were private, their positivity score was 3.6. So I'll go into this more, but basically it showed that there was a much more dissatisfaction of people's job satisfaction. People had less job satisfaction when they were closeted. This showed that there was significant difference in survey scores based on workplace openness. The results indicated a correlation between openness and positivity. But there was another interesting thing, was that the open LGBT employees had about the same positivity score as the heterosexual employees. So that to me was a very striking result, that open LGBT employees have as much job satisfaction as their straight counterparts. Next slide, please. I won't go into that graphs, but the survey showed that perceptions about the work environment are much different for those. Again, my computer went off again. Give me a second to correct it. Keeps on going to sleep. Okay, the survey showed that perceptions about the work environment are much different for those who have private work compared to those who are open. Closeted employees are less likely to believe opportunities or advancement are fair and equitable for LGBT employees. And closeted employees are less likely to feel Goddard is a welcoming environment for them. Next slide, please. The survey also showed that closeted employees face more challenges at work than those who are open. They feel likely to feel pressure to hide their sexual orientation. And this was important. Closeted employees are more likely to believe that they will be more successful if they don't share their sexual orientation or maintain non-conforming gender expressions. And that's one of the things that, for people that are straight, I mean, just think about if you can talk about life at home, about your partner, what you do during the weekend. It's not a normal environment if you're not out. I shouldn't say this, but in my opinion, it's not a normal environment for a person to be able to not talk about his social life or her social life at all at work and feel afraid of doing that. And it does have consequences in their job performance. Next slide, please. This was another interesting thing, climate towards the community. Overall, mostly positive responses in both quantitative and qualitative portions of the survey. 70% of the narrative comments were viewed as positive LGBT issues, and 75% of the respondents claimed to be an LGBT ally. The next bullet was that there is a lot of confusion about trans issues, and that's something we actually have to work on. And as you can see, 80% of respondents felt LGBT employees were treated fairly, but only 65% felt the same for transgender employees. So there was a takeaway that, basically we have 50% of the people in the closet, but the people that are straight, 75% are supportive of LGBT. So there's a lot more pro-gay sentiment on campus than a lot of people realize that are LGBT. Next slide, please. Okay, impact of the survey. It's nice to do a survey, but I guess what happened after the survey was important. Again, we basically developed an action plan, which is on the next slide. We presented the results to center management, D&I committees, and employees through multiple presentations. This is very important. We led a Goddard panel discussion, our journey of launching the NASA Goddard Climate Study at the Out and Equal Summit in Washington, D.C. in October of 2019. The acting center director was part of the panel, and that meant a lot to us, and that meant a lot to the audience, that the center director was part of the panel. Several NASA centers, the first is Langley Research Center in Virginia, are using our survey as a template for their surveys. Other federal agencies have contacted the LGBT Advisory Committee regarding the survey, and we repeated the survey in 2020 to establish trends as well as to deep dive into issues brought out in the first survey. We're still doing analysis on it, so I can't share the results yet. Next slide, please. Action plan. Yes, you can do a survey, but then what do you do afterwards? One of the most important things is to help, our closeted friends to be more out at work. So it was help to support safe workplaces. And again, we continued the past practice of the Center Director and NASA Administrator sending out Pride Proclamation to employees in June. One of the important points I want to make here is the NASA Administrator sent out a proclamation for Pride Month even though Trump did not authorize it. And it was one of the very few federal agencies that continued to acknowledge Pride Month. And we are very happy about that. You know, he didn't have to do it, but the NASA administrator continued doing that. We're making our policies very visible and supported by management. We've developed an ally program. And the thing is, like, in a meeting, people have said, you know, it's very, if you're talking to somebody and you're gay and you're basically talking about pro-gay rights, it doesn't mean that much to somebody. But if somebody's straight and they talk about pro-gay rights, they have nothing to gain by it. So it's very important to have an ally program. We do teaching tools, sexual orientation, and we're trying to explore in-reach initiatives to support invisible community. And also we're focusing on transgender issues. There's a lot of confusion about what transgender is, and is even confusion with the LGBT community. And so we're trying to educate people on that. And next slide. Okay, I'm kind of on time here. Again, NASA is going back to the moon. This is a plug. NASA is going back to the moon in 2024 and then Mars, and we need your support. That's one of the reasons I think you're seeing so much of the Mars lander, because I don't remember when the last Mars lander landed that they actually showed it landing and the hullabaloo, but we need public support to continue our mission. And our last administrator was really good in getting private industry involved and international partners, but this is very expensive and we just need public support. So I guess that's the end of my talk.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Lutz. So again, we'll wait and see if anybody types up some questions here. In the meantime, I just would really like to thank you for, dedicating your time to do this talk for us. I really appreciate it. You were definitely one of the people I really wanted to hear from, and I was very excited about this, and I'm glad I got to hear from you today. So I appreciate it very much, Dr. Lutz. And thank you, Dr. McBride, for coming in clutch here on this one without Ellie today. It's unfortunate she couldn't be here, but I know she's going to watch the recording and everything afterwards. And thank you to the Marshall University Physics Department, and thank you to the American Institute of Physics for initially providing funding for this program. So this has been a very fun time for me. Unfortunately, this is the last talk that I will be attending as I've graduated, and Ellie will move on and assume the role of SPS president and continue in the fall. I think we're getting someone else, Dr. Caitlin Ahrens, in the fall, possibly, also from Goddard Space Flight Center. So very much looking forward to that. All right, so again, if you have any questions, be sure to type in the chat to the right or below the video, depending on what browser you're using. So Dr. McBride, do you have any questions to start off with?
Well, one statement I wanted to make, not necessarily a question for Dr. Lutz, but I do want to thank you, Jackie, and Ellie for organizing the speaker series. This is your last one, so I do want to thank you for all the effort and time that you did put into the series and making everything work smoothly and inviting out great speakers like Dr. Lutz and the ones that we've started all the way back in November for the speaker series. So thank you to the two of you for all your efforts that you put into this.
Thank you, Dr. McBride. Okay, so we still don't have any questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Lutz?
Well, just a little bit of, I don't know, exactly who I'm talking about there, but I mean, I started as a scientist, and my first jobs at Goddard was data analysis, working as a science director, and I morphed over to become a system engineer. And so you never really know sometimes where your career is going to bring you. I mean, I thought I was going to be a meteorologist, and so I wound up not doing that. And I also encourage people that are in the sciences to take a system engineering course. And I may have mentioned this before, is that even though you're working in the sciences, you will be working with people that are actually applying what your research is doing. And to have a system engineering background gives you insight of what happens after you've done your research. And I just think it's very beneficial. I mean, system engineering hasn't been around that long. And so maybe 20, 30 years to be taught. And so it's a interesting concept of, basically design, development, testing, and then deployment. So I would just encourage people to, if they have a chance, take a system engineering course.
Thank you. I know a lot of students will like to hear that. So thank you for the advice. All right. Well, I think that now would be a good time to do our Yeti drawing. Dr. Lutz, if you want to stick around for this, you can. If you would like to leave, that's fine too. But again, thank you very much for dedicating your time and effort to this. It's very enjoyed having you here.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
I'll cut off. Okay, thanks. I think cut off and work out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, so I don't know how to do this to ensure that there's no funny business with the drawing on. So here is obviously an empty jar. So I will take all of our tickets that we have and put those into the jar on the left. And we shake this up. I think that's probably sufficient. And then we will go in and we will draw a single ticket from there. And we will, can't really get my hands in there, so we're just going to draw here. And who do we have? We have Debbie Harvey. So we do have a phone number to reach Debbie Harvey, so we will let her know that she has won the Yeti cooler.
She's in the other room. I'll let her know.
Ah, there we go. So
Yep.
I don't hear the screams and excitement from the other room.
She would not be watching this, I'll tell you that.
Okay. Well, there you go. So you can tell her that she won. So.
All right, cool. Okay.
All right, so that is our last one for this sort of spring semester. We will be starting in the fall. Jackie will not be leading it anymore, but like she said, Ellie will be. So if there's anybody out there that actually wants to become a part of the speaker series too, don't be afraid to reach out to us and let us know. We will be having this go into the fall semester, and it would be nice to have a full roster of talks for that semester as well. So we will be trying to reach out and get select speakers, but if you have a interesting story to share with us and let us know as well.
All right, thank you very much. Everyone have a great evening.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we're done.